It starts like this. You're standing in a crowd surrounded by noise, movement, smiling faces, and then something shifts. You notice a silence that no one else hears. A flicker behind someone's eyes. A word spoken with perfect timing, but no soul behind it. And in that instant, the veil slips. You see it, not the surface, but what it's hiding. The contradiction between what people say and what they carry. The performance of joy masking a collapse. The world, shimmering and hollow, a house of glass reflecting its own denial. You try to brush it off. Try to stay with the others, but your body tightens. Your mind can't let go. Something inside you whispers, "Don't look away." That's when it begins. The burden of awareness, not everyone carries it. Some are built for speed, simplicity, and survival. But you were built to see it. And that sight, once it arrives, doesn't leave. You see the patterns behind the noise. You sense the grief in strangers. You feel the weight of systems, stories, histories pressing down on the present moment like a storm. You don't just experience reality, you absorb it. And the world doesn't understand what that does to a person. It praises clarity in theory, but punishes it in practice. It wants wisdom without discomfort, truth without consequences. Feeling so long as it doesn't disturb the script. So when you speak, you're too intense. When you feel, you're too sensitive. When you hesitate before laughing, you're accused of being cold. But none of that is true. You're just carrying something they can't see. And no one ever told you how much it would hurt to be awake in a world that wants to sleep. You try to shake it. You try to be normal. But the deeper you see, the harder it becomes to pretend. The more clearly you understand, the less you belong. And that loneliness, quiet, invisible, constant, becomes its own kind of exile. You're not broken, you're not malfunctioning, you're just exposed. Like living in a glass house where you can see out, but no one sees in. That's what awareness does. It strips away the illusion of safety, of simplicity, of sameness. And in its place it gives you sight. But that sight comes at a cost. Because now you see suffering where others see statistics. You see exploitation where others see efficiency. You see soul where others see success. You feel love where others fear vulnerability. And you're left wondering, how do I carry all of this and still move through the world? That's the question that haunts the awake. When you see the world for what it truly is, how do you carry that weight? You're not looking for answers. You're looking for permission to feel what you feel. To be who you are, to not turn away. And in this space right here, you're going to find something, not a solution, but a path, not closure, but connection. Not a cure, but a kind of truth that doesn't ask you to be less. Because maybe the problem isn't that you see too much. Maybe the problem is that no one ever taught you how to live with the clarity you carry. And now you're about to learn. This pain you carry, it didn't come out of nowhere. It's not weakness. It's not overthinking. It's the natural outcome of a system built for surfaces meeting a soul wired for depth. You feel like you're too sensitive. Like life hits you harder than it should. But what if that sensitivity is precision? What if your emotional intensity is the cost of being able to read reality like a symphony? Science has a name for it, sensory processing sensitivity. Psychology calls it high sensitivity. But labels aren't the point. The point is this: your nervous system is tuned differently. You don't just react, you receive. You don't skim life, you inhabit it. That's not dysfunction, that's design. You walk into a room and feel what no one says. You sense undercurrents before they surface. You absorb emotion like breath. And while others brush off a headline or a harsh word, you carry it because you were never taught to build barriers against things that matter. But that depth has a shadow. When your brain is wired to process everything, it doesn't stop when it's full. It keeps spinning, remembering, reanalyzing, reconstructing. That's the engine of insight, and also the trap of rumination. You try to make sense of suffering. You try to solve injustice in your head. You try to fix what your body feels, and you end up drowning in loops that offer no exit. And then the guilt creeps in. You start to think, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I care too much. Maybe if I just stopped feeling it would get easier, but that thought, that's the turning point. Because it's not you who's too much. It's the world that never made space for people like you to feel honestly without being punished for it. And here's where the real fracture happens, when your values rise, but your power doesn't. When you know what's right, but can't stop what's wrong, that tension. That's moral injury. It's what happens when awareness reveals not just injustice, but powerlessness. When your soul wants to act, but the system has no room for your hands, your voice, your vision, that's not just frustration, that's a spiritual wound. And most people carry it in silence. You start to lose faith. Not just in institutions, but in your own ability to change anything. You start to wonder, what's the point of seeing clearly if it just leaves me feeling helpless? But here's what the world doesn't understand about people like you. You don't feel deeply because you're fragile. You feel deeply because you're honest. You haven't numbed yourself to survive. You haven't turned away from pain to keep going. And that refusal, that integrity, it hurts, but it's holy. You're not alone in this, not really. There are others, quiet ones scattered across the world, who wake up every day with this same ache, the same clarity, the same question. How do I live with this awareness and not collapse under it? That question doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're alive. And now you're beginning to remember, maybe you're not supposed to carry all of it. Maybe you were never meant to fix the whole world. Maybe you were meant to feel it, name it, witness it, and from that witnessing, begin to find a different way forward. Not out, but through. You try to hold it together, you keep showing up. You say the right things. You smile when you're supposed to. But inside, something's unraveling. Quietly, like thread being pulled in the dark. You feel it in your chest first, then in the silence that follows every conversation. The slow widening space between you and the world. You used to find comfort in people. Now they feel far away, like echoes behind glass. The noise that used to energize you now grates. The light feels too sharp, the pace too fast. You begin to retreat, not by choice, but by necessity. You're not running, you're searching for air. But even here in the stillness, something begins to ache. This is the descent. The part that looks like isolation, but feels more like disintegration. It's what happens when your awareness grows faster than your world. When the things you see no longer align with the life you built. When the truth becomes too large to carry in public. No one talks about this part because dissent isn't marketable. It's not a breakthrough, it's a breaking. It's the soft implosion of certainty. You try to speak, but your words feel like static. You try to share, but your insight sounds like judgment. You try to care, but your silence gets mistaken for withdrawal. And little by little, you stop explaining. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you're tired of translating your soul into a language others won't hear. It's not just disconnection, it's exile. And in that exile, something darker begins to whisper. What if you've gone too far? What if you've seen something you can't unsee? What if you've stepped off a path that no one else will follow? That's when you remember Cassandra. She wasn't cursed for being wrong, she was cursed for being right. She saw the fire coming and was called mad. She named the truth and was met with silence. But her tragedy wasn't disbelief, it was isolation. being left to carry a vision too heavy for one heart alone. And you start to wonder, am I carrying something the world has no place for? The doubt creeps in. Maybe you are too much. Maybe you should soften, smile more. Shrink yourself back into something manageable. But that shrinking, that's the real wound. The moment you deny what you see just to be allowed to stay, you're not too much. You're just unfiltered in a filtered world. And the pain you feel, it's not dysfunction. It's the cost of not turning away. Still, the loneliness hurts. Because awareness without resonance becomes a kind of grief. And in that grief, you begin to disappear. But here, in the stillness, something unexpected happens. You notice a flicker, a presence. A quiet force that doesn't ask you to explain, perform, or shrink. It doesn't tell you to fix it or forget it. It just waits. This is the hermit. Not the one who hides, but the one who sees. In every culture, the seer walks alone. Not because they failed to belong, but because they were called to a deeper truth. They enter the wilderness, not to escape, but to listen. They disappear so they can return with vision. You are not lost, you are not broken, you are becoming. The descent is not the end of the road. It is the sacred corridor between what was and what will be. And the silence you feel, that's not emptiness, that's space. The necessary pause before the truth returns, not as burden, but as guide. And just before the bottom, you begin to hear it. You're not alone. You're awakening. It doesn't begin with light, it begins with stillness. A soft pause where the panic used to be. A breath you didn't know you were holding. A moment of not running. After the descent, the mind expects revelation. But the soul knows better. It knows that truth doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives like warmth returning to cold limbs. Quiet, almost invisible. You don't need to transform, you need to return. Return to the parts of you that were pushed aside to make others comfortable. Return to the voice you muted so you wouldn't be abandoned. Return to the truth you felt before you were told to ignore it. This is the moment the burden shifts. Because now you stop resisting what you see. You stop trying to make it lighter by making yourself smaller. You stop trying to explain your sensitivity away like it's an accident. And instead you begin to ask a different question. What if this was never a flaw? What if this was my invitation? That's when the work begins, not the kind of work that fixes, but the kind that integrates. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But that darkness isn't just pain, it's power. It's the reservoir of everything you were taught to suppress. Rage, grief, wildness, vision. The shadow is not evil, it's exile. And integration is not about taming it, it's about welcoming it home. So you listen. You listen to the anger that protected you, the sorrow that softened you, the sensitivity that connected you, and the truth you buried beneath performance, politeness, and pretending you didn't care. You begin to understand that you don't need to earn your peace through perfection. You need to remember your peace through presence. The hermit returns here, not as a recluse, but as a guide. You realize solitude was never punishment. It was the sacred space where your soul found its original rhythm. You no longer chase the light, you carry it. You stop trying to belong in places that require you to betray yourself. You start building an inner world that can hold the weight of what you know without collapsing. And the more you do this, the more your awareness changes. It's no longer something you survive. It's something you wield with care, not as a weapon, not as a wound, but as a way of seeing our individuation, as Jung called it, is not becoming special, it's becoming whole. And wholeness requires you to reclaim every part of you that was ever silenced in the name of safety. This is the turning point. Not because everything is suddenly easy, but because you now trust your own depth more than others' discomfort. You begin to walk with clarity, but without urgency, with emotion, but without chaos, with presence, but without apology. And you realize the burden was never the clarity. It was the belief that you had to carry it alone. But now you carry it differently, not as weight, but as wisdom. You were never meant to carry the world. But you were meant to feel it, and that's a different kind of strength. Now that you've seen too much, the question is no longer how to forget. It's how to stay present without falling apart. How to remain awake without becoming consumed. And that doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins in the smallest moments. Moments where you choose to stay with yourself. You wake up heavy. The world already feels like too much. But instead of reaching for distraction, you place your feet on the floor and take one breath, deliberate, slow, grounding. You let your body remind you that you're still here. That awareness doesn't have to be a flood. It can be a tide. The mind says, fix everything. The nervous system says, I'm drowning. So you slow down, you drink something warm, you step outside, you touch a tree. You speak to no one, but the silence understands you. This isn't self-care, it's survival. But not in the way most people mean. It's the kind of survival that makes thriving possible. Because without grounding, awareness spirals. And when you're wired to absorb everything, your greatest act of power is choosing what to let in and what to let go. Some days that power looks like silence. Other days it looks like art. Because creation is how you release what your mind can't carry. You write not to be read, but to be real. You paint not to be seen, but to see yourself. You move not to be watched, but to feel alive in a world that's tried to numb you. No, you learn that expression is not indulgence, it's alchemy. And somewhere in this process, you begin to notice that the burden lightens, not because the world changed, but because your relationship to it did. Still, even the strongest inner world can't survive in total isolation. You need mirrors. You need others who carry the same depth. Not for validation, but for communion. People who don't flinch when you speak the truth. People who don't shrink when you reveal your grief. People who look at you with the quiet recognition of, I know what it feels like to carry things that don't fit into sentences. These aren't just friendships, they're lifelines. You begin to let go of trying to belong everywhere. You stop begging the surface to make room for your depth. And instead you find your way to the souls who speak your language without translation. That's how you cope, by creating a life that honors what you feel, not one that asks you to apologize for it. You find rhythms instead of rules. You make rituals out of ordinary acts. A walk becomes a return. A journal becomes a sanctuary. A moment of stillness becomes a declaration. I'm allowed to exist like this. You do not numb. You do not run. You do not erase what you've seen. You build a life that can hold it. Because now you understand, the point was never to stop feeling. It was to feel with intention, to stay open without staying raw, to stay awake without losing your peace, to see what's broken and still choose to protect what's beautiful. And you're doing that now, not perfectly, but honestly, which is more than enough. You never asked for this. You didn't ask to feel so deeply, to notice the fracture behind someone's smile, to carry the weight of moments no one else remembers. You didn't ask to inherit a mind that connects every thread or a heart that breaks at the slightest cruelty. You just woke up one day and realized, you see, and you've spent years wondering if that sight was a flaw. But what if it wasn't? What if this heaviness isn't a malfunction, but a message? James Hillman once wrote, "The wound is the place where the soul begins its journey." And maybe your wound isn't where you broke. Maybe it's where you began. Not everyone is asked to carry this burden. Not everyone is given a nervous system tuned to the frequency of truth. Not everyone can walk into a room and feel what's unspoken. But you can, you do. And yes, it costs you. You lose ease, you lose illusion. You lose the ability to go along with things that feel wrong just because they're normal. And in return, you gain something rare. You gain discernment, you gain integrity. You gain a kind of spiritual clarity that no system can sell you. But that clarity is lonely until it isn't. Because somewhere along the path, you begin to realize something. You were never meant to carry this alone. You were meant to carry it differently, not as panic, not as punishment, but as presence. You begin to see your sensitivity as a sacred compass, your grief as a measure of your depth, your sorrow as the space carved out by love. And suddenly the burden begins to shift. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer crushes you. Because now you're not fighting what you see, you're walking with it, holding it, letting it teach you where to go. You become a lantern bearer, not because you have all the answers, but because you've learned how to walk through the fog without losing yourself. You become someone who doesn't just survive with their eyes open, but lives that way. And you begin to understand the burden was never just about what you see. It was about what you're here to be. You were meant to be a mirror in a world that hides, a witness in a culture that forgets, a quiet source of truth in a time that rewards performance. And now your pain has context, your path has shape. You no longer need permission to feel. You no longer need to explain why things affect you so deeply. You no longer need to shrink to make others more comfortable. You are not a problem to fix. You are a presence to honor. And the world may never fully understand that. But the few who do, the few who find your light in the fog, they will recognize you. And in that recognition, your burden will become something else entirely. Not a weight, but a legacy. Because when you choose to stay awake, when you choose to feel without flinching, to speak without softening the truth, to carry your vision without collapsing under it, you do something revolutionary. You show others that it's possible to see too much and still love anyway. To feel too much and still create beauty. To know too much and still choose joy. And that choice, that's not just strength, that's grace.